Welcome back. We continue here. Forensic investigator Paul O'Sullivan appeared before Parliament's ad hoc committee earlier this week in what has been a high-stakes 10 series of hearings. The committee was established to investigate allegations of corruption, political interference, as well as state capture within the South African police service and the broader justice system. Let's look back at the testimony with the security expert Eldred de Klerk. Mr. de Klerk, good to have you on the program this evening. So from a security and intelligence perspective, how unusual is it for a civilian witness like Paul O'Sullivan to repeatedly refuse to disclose part of their background, especially before a parliamentary committee? And what risk does that create, especially for public trust?
Good evening, and good evening to Channel 405 viewers. It is highly unlikely that we will see a repeat of this in our lifetimes. Firstly, the ad hoc committee is an anomaly. This is not anything we would have seen before. We have parliamentary portfolio committees, and they should routinely be doing the work of what this ad hoc committee is doing, and that is to interrogate our intelligence services, our police services, our justice department, to ensure that there's integrity and that there are standards. So now, and that legislation and leadership is not failing those institutions, and that there are nothing that they can do within their purview that they're failing to do to ensure that these institutions work for the common good. So to have the committee is an anomaly. Then to have a civilian with 3 passports who's suspected of having a checkered past and may himself have handlers or be doing the bidding of others, seemingly have unfettered access to the criminal justice department, and then sits there and says, with all the privilege that he already has, that gave him part of that access, to then say, I will answer this and not answer that, when he's voluntarily come to the committee, maybe with some arm twisting, but he still voluntarily came there, took the position to do this under oath. He understands that there's nothing that can be used against him unless he perjures himself, and yet he wants to dictate the terms of the inquiry and try to actually steer what the committee then gets to inquire into. That's highly unusual, and it's highly likely that it will repeat itself. And he hasn't done his own credibility any good, and he hasn't done his facts any good, because now we tend to believe him even less.
Yeah. When allegations of espionage, for instance, Mr. de Klerk, are raised in a political forum, as happened with Julius Malema, for instance, what are the dangers of blurring intelligence concerns with political contestation? Well,
unfortunately, politics and intelligence mix when we call it national security, because national security is ultimately about protecting the interests of the state and protecting the body politic. So that blurring of lines is constantly there. We actually know that part of this inquiry is about political interference. We also know there's been political interference when it comes to intelligence and what intelligence is used for. So when we have somebody who has a self-confessed history as a counterintelligence officer, that gives him a very peculiar set of skills, because counterintelligence is about ensuring that you counter any threats to the state or the institution, or that institution itself is not compromised either from within or from out. So to have somebody sit there and play these games, and seemingly played with our national interest, is very, very problematic, because the parliamentarians then have a duty to say, what does this mean for the integrity of our institutions, for the integrity of the body politic in South Africa, and for our national interest? And has anything untoward happened that threatens any of that? So the blurring of lines is there. It's something that they manage on a constant basis every day. And we've seen somebody play that game seemingly very successfully in South Africa for many years now.
Yeah. So O'Sullivan also claims that corrupt elements within crime intelligence are using Parliament as a battlefield. From your experience, Eldred, how often do intelligence of factional battles spill into overt political spaces like this?
We don't often see it. We get to know about it by inference. And unfortunately, we got to know about it, especially when we had President Zuma. And he often was being said to be the one who have divided up our intelligence, and that he was using intelligence to serve his own interests. Those are inferences. Those are speculations. It's stuff that he may have been accused of. It's not something that any of us can definitively say. We know that intelligence was broken up and then brought back together. Now it's supposed to be both domestic and foreign, and then we have crime intelligence. We know those intelligence agencies has been hollowed out, people who were appointed to the heads of these agencies, and they weren't wholly and fully qualified and competent and fit for the task. So we know all those things happened. We know those machinations played out in your lifetime and mine. What we don't know is what was the motive, and we cannot definitively say who gained directly from these games in the intelligence arena. What we do know is that it allowed, while this has been playing out, and while speculation was rife, it allowed for certain people to enrich themselves. It allowed for certain acts to go unnoticed and go unpunished, it seems, and it allowed for others to fill positions that they wouldn't and get benefit that they wouldn't otherwise have got. So definitely some people benefited while all this was going on, and for most of us it remained in the realm of speculation, and we can't definitively say. We're only now beginning to understand even a little bit, much like we did at Zondo, about what actually happened while we suspected we were expecting things. We were suspecting things were happening, we just didn't have the facts.
Eldred, the Crime Intelligence Fund has emerged as a recurring fault line, if you will. From a security governance standpoint, how vulnerable are Secret Service accounts to abuse in countries with weak oversight?
Well, it's abused everywhere because there's a very select committee that actually gets to get to know what happens. And for most of it, it's unfettered access to public funds that get used for all kinds of nefarious purposes. And often all you have to do is mislabel it, you have to misrepresent it, and you can get away with it. And a lot of it is done in cash. So that is something that all countries are challenged by, even more so when we have in a country, as you said, weak oversight, and there's a cloak and a veil of secrecy, and you have somebody come and says, I can't tell you about this because you are not cleared and vetted to know. Yet Parliament is the highest authority in the country. They are supposed to be able to ask questions. So when parliamentarians can't even ask questions because the state security services or crime intelligence has decided that they are not appropriately vetted or they don't have the right clearance, so we simply don't tell them. That is unacceptable in a democratic regime because that's the tail wagging the dog. The dog remains Parliament, and Parliament, regardless of the fact that they are public representatives, should be able to ask hard and difficult questions, especially when it comes to the use of public funds.
Yeah. Also worrying is that MPs from multiple parties have been accused of working with rogue intelligence officials. If proven true, what would that say about the state's ability to safeguard classified systems, especially from political capture?
Well, you see, this whole question of classification has often in the past been used for people to hide certain decisions that they made. That was either in very narrow political interest or even sometimes criminal interest, and wasn't done necessarily in the interest of the country. So we've tried to revisit this whole question of classification of information to ensure that there's a justified restriction on certain information, but where that's not justified, that the public can actually have access to that information through requesting to know about it, and if it's fitting, to hear about it. So when we see that something has been classified, even in the short term, we need to understand that knowing or releasing that information will compromise an ongoing investigation or put the national interest at risk. So when an MP, for his or own purposes, actually divulges that information prematurely, we need to ask what's the impact of that. And the impact of that, if it's a threat to national security, they run the risk of being charged for doing that, because that should not have happened, where that information has been duly classified, and rightfully so, and there's a justification for that level of classification, and they don't have access to it, and it shouldn't be in the public purview. Legislation makes provision for those who do so to be charged.
That was security expert Eldred de Klerk joining us from Cape Town. Eldred, thank you so much for your time, helping us make sense of proceedings.